Happy Friday, my friends. My name is Tim Mikhelishvili. I'm your host today. We most remember speakers not because of how much energy they have or their unique ideas, but also because of the stories and specific examples they provide us with. And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy following Adam Grant, as well as many of the millions of you and many of you who may be joining here today. Recently, I attended his keynote presentation at the Grammarly Business Rewriting the Future of Work seminar, and I found a lot of his examples extraordinary. Those that I think I need to share with many of you. And that's why this Friday, and as I often go live on Mondays and Fridays in the mornings at All Out Coach, both on Instagram and on LinkedIn, I want to inspire you for the week and the weekend ahead. I summarized the highlights, the 5 highlights and for 5 strategies and the results of using scientific thinking in business in my in-weekend newsletter as well, to which I invite you to subscribe here on LinkedIn. In fact, I'm going to post it in the comments right here. It's in the 5th year. It's in the 5th year already. I just posted it now. You can get many more details. I share lots of specific case studies. I feature business leaders across pharma, where I've spent most of my career, all of my entire career, and beyond, and other industries as well. What are these 5 strategies, and what are these highlights that I cannot wait to share with all of you? And well, before I start, I want to make sure that we have a discussion here. So whether or not you can attend right now or afterwards, once you watch this live, share your comments. Let me know your thoughts. Let's start with the first one. And let's get right into it. A randomized trial of 116 early startup founders in Italy. An experiment that compared 2 different approaches. A lean startup method training versus scientific training. In the lean startup method, business leaders are taught to iterate, to spend less time planning and more time changing their strategy, pivoting, employing cross-functional sprint teams, for example, in order to meet small goals, one goal at a time, but faster, accelerate the evolution of their pipeline as well. Well, they're taught the how, right? How to iterate. Well, in the second group, startup founders and business executives were trained on first principle thinking, how to eliminate assumptions, leaps of faith, how to interpret and collect scientific data, and how to analyze it as well, analyze the methodology and the results as well. They were taught on not just the how, but also the why they needed to iterate by describing those and understanding those scientific principles. They were also taught in the second group to implement new decision rules that would allow them to change or continue their current strategy as well. What happened after 1 year was that those business executives who received that specialized scientific training, regardless of their prior background, they brought in 40 times greater revenue and profits at the end of that year. And so Adam Grant is one of our most leading social scientists of our time and an organizational expert. And he has never seen such a staggering effect in any data that he has reviewed. And this is why I wanted to share this particular example. It's also in a Harvard Business Review. You can find more details by, again, clicking the in-weekend newsletter. This reminded me of a post that I had shared on All Out Coach last year. because in the last few years, we've learned to certainly change our plans very quickly, change how we approach work, business, relationships, in the pandemic. And I coined this term pandemic intelligence, in which I summarized like this: life is short, things are rough, our stakes are too high and attractive, our dialogue is too precious for us to waste on blame and pettiness. So work and let work, live and let live, ask and do not assume. And it's in that last phrase, ask and do not assume, where I emphasize the need to analyze your process, your business, your relationships more scientifically. Ask before you make those assumptions. Maybe you'll find out more of what you could change, of how you can run your business better, or how your employees can provide more quality work. So, and another reference that his study reminded me was my podcast. As you know, I'm the host of the All Out Coach podcast, an international global leadership platform that's deeply rooted on sportsmanship and science. And it's dedicated to leadership and organizational culture, organizational change, and company culture. And one of the episodes early, when I was starting this podcast in 2019, I devoted it to helping business leaders inspire their employees, regardless of their background, to be like sports athletes, like scientists. I also have a LinkedIn article. So whether or not I may be partial, yes, I work with scientific thought leaders for my entire career. However, that scientific method works in saving and scaling our business as well. Let's go to the second example. Morningstar, a tomato packaging and processing company that's widely referenced by many top global business leaders and gurus, management, business school professors. They have an interesting process at Morningstar where they allow a new hire to revisit their job description in a year and ask 5 to 10 of their colleagues who are dependent on their work to convince them and to agree with them to rewrite that job description. So they build that business case and they're allowed that option. And when we think about how we build job descriptions, we really target the role, the responsibility when we write those job descriptions. We don't know what new hire is going to fill that role. And it's up to the new hire, the employee, to shape that job description and those responsibilities and maybe extend its boundaries as well. So interesting approach for all of us to consider. A third example here is related to two different scenarios, both a new hire scenario as well as an employee across their work cycle in that company, across at any tenure. What types of evidence did Adam Grant share here in adding personality to business during these impersonal times? What is the return on investment on making business more personal? Well, first, for new hires, typically, when someone enters our company, we train them on our organization, on the job skills, the resources they may have. And so Francesca Gino from Harvard Business School conducted an experiment, a 1-hour onboarding training session that nevertheless took three different approaches to onboarding and orientation. One was a company overview, general company overview and skills. Second was organizational orientation group, in which the new hires learned about the company culture, its values, its norms of communication. And then the third group was the individual orientation group, in which rules were reversed. And it was actually the new hire that was sharing publicly with their entire group and with their employer their personal journeys, their background, their successes and failures, their accomplishments, their awards. They were given time to focus on that first before learning about the company. So it turned out that 1 hour uh, orientation and that 1 hour reversal of the rules in this company in India called Wipro BP, a global business process outsourcing company, well known in telecommunications, it led to 50% increase in productivity in 6 months, in as early as in 6 months, by simply allowing your new hires, your employees, to share their personal stories and uh, their accomplishments. That also reminded me of a very unique approach to orientation that I was a part of myself at one startup that became very successful and was acquired by a larger company within a year. Uh, I remember being asked the following question early in the orientation class. That was probably it was a full day class. What is your legacy? What is your legacy was the question that all of the new hires received. I think when a company asks a deeply rooted question like that, they demonstrate an interest in your training. And in fact, it was at that company where I received intensive one-on-one training by a PhD who had spent 30 years in the industry. Let's look at not new hires, but those who are experienced. Okay, so you've managed to bring on new hires, and they feel like they belong, because remember that orientation, that first month is critical in determining and predicting the long-term retention and quality of work and engagement from your employees. Right, so it's very important to focus on onboarding. Well, once you have the new hire on the team, what do you do? What kind of strategies uh, can you employ in order to make work and business more personal during these impersonal times? Well, there's a study apparently that I learned from Adam Grant by Jason Sandvik, who's a business who graduated from Tulane University. In fact, I believe he's a professor as well. So in 2020, he wrote a paper in Massachusetts in which he studied the effects of requiring sales reps in a very competitive industry of appliance sales, including TVs, of being required to randomly choose a colleague to have lunch with no business agenda. So sales reps, many of whom were competitors, were required to meet with their counterparts, with their colleagues randomly, random colleagues, even those that they may have not known or worked with, and sit down with no business agenda at all. And it was those sales reps that brought in 24% greater revenue as well. Which I think reminds us that paradoxically, when we don't discuss business, our business improves, very simply. And we need to remember that in these virtual, in the digital era in which we live, in which we go from one meeting to the next, and we don't get to chance to get to know each other that well. Or as we transition from job to job in this gig economy as well. The workflow impacts our quality. And as Adam Grant mentioned in his keynote presentation, and I'll just quote him, you don't get quality work without quality of life. Quality of life may mean allowing employees the flexibility of when to work and where to work as well. What is the evidence? Well, there's evidence even prior to the pandemic. Before 2007, apparently there were 40 studies that had demonstrated that when employees are given the flexibility of working remotely, at least part of the time, uh, they are more productive, they perform better, they're more satisfied and fulfilled. And there's someone that you should look up, Nick Bloom from Stanford, who has done some of the most robust studies even before the pandemic. It's just that the pandemic has now accelerated our transition and our thinking as business leaders in terms of what to expect of workflow and metrics as well. Leslie Perlow is another example from Adam Grant's presentation. She wrote a book called Finding Time decades ago, before the pandemic. And she demonstrated the results from an experiment which she called quiet time experiment, in which employees were not involved in any meetings. They didn't have any meetings from 9 a.m. to noon for 3 days of the week. And that increased the productivity by 67% by simply having that quiet time, the time to focus, to have flow, not just work. If you break down the word workflow into work and flow, it's really flow where you feel like you're not working, where you're doing your best quality work. And sometimes those meetings actually have the opposite effect. So there is data from Leslie Perlow. You can learn more, again, from my in-weekend newsletter, or going directly to her study as well, and reading her book as well. And the final and very important strategy that I think that we need to think about as employees, as business leaders, has to do with the gaps in leadership, the generational gap in leadership, and that interplay between your individuality and the organization and its strategy and goals, which becomes particularly pronounced in a corporate environment. Abby Lunny is the managing director of the thought leadership practice at the Harris Poll. And she commented on Adam Grant's presentation during the Q&A discussion, in which Abby cited a very new experiment that she's recently conducted with the Milken Institute, the very well-recognized Milken Institute, in which she interviewed global business leaders, Fortune 500 business leaders recently. And she learned from them through her extensive interviews that the number one concern that some of our top leaders have today is not the inflation that's taking place, but it's the generational gap in leadership. There's a huge gap in leadership across generations, where the next generation of leaders entering the workforce today, they're demanding and they're expecting their personality to shine at work, their personality to be expressed fully at the workplace, and the work not to define who they are. They're asking for purpose. We've read about that, and across so many articles across social media in the past few years, even before the pandemic. But knowing that the business leaders' concern is that generational gap is, I think, a first step in understanding the need to address how we regard leadership and running business. There is the other side of this notion as well, right? That regardless of what age we are, what generation, we all want the same thing, have a cause, to have a purpose at work, to have attention, right? And recognition for our work, whether or not we're 10 years old or we're 80 years old, right? Regardless of our background, we actually share much more than we think. However, the leadership practices may be different, and they may be long ingrained in the minds of many of our executives today. And this is what Adam Grant uh, addressed also in what he calls optimal distinctiveness. So, optimal distinctiveness, what he refers to. Hello, optimal distinctiveness. Okay, sorry for that interruption. Uh, it's a Friday morning here in New York. So, optimal distinctiveness. Optimal distinctiveness is what he refers to as this paradox of having the responsibility of contributing to the benefit of the organization or the team, the group, versus being able to demonstrate your uniqueness or your distinctiveness as an employee. So, in as much as employers demand your contribution to their benefit, their organizational well-being, you have to realize that there's an optimal level that you need to allow and permit for your employees to feel like they're unique, like they're distinct, yet they have that distinctiveness, yet they're also part of the group as well, and to which they belong. They feel that they belong. And that's a very important and very challenging dilemma, I think, probably challenging problem to solve. However, just identifying it as a goal, as a strategy, is, I think, the first step. That's now supported by many of our top global business leaders that we need to acknowledge. Yes, we all have the same human expectations from work. We want to belong, but how we create the environment in which everyone brings their own personality while also contributing to a team is what we, I think, need to focus on as well. These are the 5 strategies, again, that we can use in order to save our business, regardless of its industry, and maybe grow it and scale it as well by employing scientific thinking. I'm looking forward to your comments. Those of you who may have attended now, or once you watch this presentation, please let me know what topics you'd like to be on the All Out Coach podcast as well, or on my lives. I go live usually on Mondays and Fridays. This is a new routine that I worked out for myself in the last few years. Most Mondays and Fridays in the mornings on Instagram as well as on LinkedIn, in order to inspire many of you for the week and the weekend ahead, and to share what I learned and to teach what we learn with each, and to discuss the topics that matter today and tomorrow as well. Thank you again. Have a great weekend, my friends.